I'm Karima Brown. It's Sunday and it's time for The Fix. First up, Deputy Finance Minister David Masondo is in the hot seat today, explaining just how the government plans to grow the economy. Then, with 62% of local municipalities classified as dysfunctional, we look at how they are crippling South African businesses. And as is custom, we take a look at our weekend newspapers to see what's made the headlines this week and why. The Fix starts now. This is The Fix, where every Sunday, without fear or favour, we question the big role players. We look ahead to tell you what matters, how it affects you, and why you should care. No shortcuts, no quick fixes. That was the strong sentiment that came from President Cyril Ramaphosa's response to critics who are saying the country needs more than dreams to rise out of its slump. In his State of the Nation address, he asked us all to become doers and help him bring faster economic prosperity, jobs and a better life for all South Africans. Helping us to explain the plans for economic growth is Deputy Finance Minister David Masondo. Mr. Masondo, it's a great pleasure to have you. This is the first time I believe you are giving a formal interview to television, so it's an honor to have you in the studio. Thank you so very much for joining me on The Fix.
Thank you, Karim. It's really an honor for me to be here, and good morning to your viewers.
Now, one of the things, of course, that defines South Africa's economy is that it's a mixed economy, and many people get wrong what that actually means, and it means essentially that private business is very involved in the economy, but the state also takes an active role, particularly in strategic assets. Now, let's go straight to those strategic assets. Your state-owned companies, they are bankrupt, they've been hollowed out, they were captured by the state, and they're now exposing the economy to severe, risks. We just heard Zimbabwe owes us in the region of, 80 million US dollars, and they're not necessarily in a position to pay it back. So give us your turnaround strategy with your part of the responsibility of strengthening the economy and growing it.
No, Karima, you're right. South Africa is a mixed economy. 70% of the economic resources are in the private hands, and 30% cooperatives and the state. So in that instance, the state has to say what are the things that we need to do to encourage the private sector to invest in the economy, to grow it, and use some of the state assets, companies that we have. And you're correct that many of them are in trouble, and as I was getting to the Treasury, getting briefing from them, I said to myself, there's very few joyrides here, there are a lot of problems. So government has put the presidential committees and inter-ministerial committee to look at all the state assets from the point of view of governance, and things that we need to do to make sure that we turn around these these state-owned entities. And in certain instances, we will require the participation of the private sector. There's talk about bringing private equity in some of the state-owned entities, such as South African Airways. There's a talk about how do we bring equity in Eskom. To make
Is equity not just a kind of nice phrase for privatization?
It is not. You can bring public equity. You can say, and I'm not saying that's what government is saying, you can say, PIC, can you buy equity into Eskom? There are a whole range of public institutions, DFIs, that can buy equity in different entities. And there's nothing wrong, inherently wrong, for bringing private equity in some of the state-owned entities. I mean, Telkom, it had to be turned around through bringing private equity, and it's in a better shape compared to many of this. And the state as well, we still have equity shares in those companies. So,
Minister, Deputy Minister, I don't want to belabor the point of Telkom, but Telkom's Share price might look good and its books might look good, but it delivers terrible services. Communities have huge problems. I myself had bought a Telkom router and it just never worked because they didn't have fiber, and you can't cancel it. So why are you holding up Telkom as an example of how state-owned companies can be turned around if you bring in private partnership? Because the service to the customer, sucks.
Look, in many instances, the performance of companies is not just a function of ownership.
Yeah.
It's also a function of management. There are great companies that are publicly owned that provide great service to their own customers. There are private companies that provide horrible services also because of their monopolies.
Yeah.
There are mixed-owned companies owned by the private sector and the public. So I think with Telkom, we've got to look at what are the causes for some of the inefficiencies that they have. I don't think it is just a function of ownership.
Yeah. Minister, let's just quickly take a listen to Yunus Karim, who's a veteran parliamentarian, speak last week in response to the State of the Nation address during the debate. He, of course, attacked both the opposition, EFF and Democratic Alliance, on the question of the economy and what we should do, because it is said that this debate is kind of far too ideological and not practical enough for us to get out of the mess that we're in. Just let's have a look.
Deputy Speaker, comrades, President and Deputy President, comrades and friends. So the opposition party insists that the President's sonar
Deputy Speaker.
Yes, Honorable Singh.
I'm rising in terms of Rule 14S. Is it not an appropriate time for us to adjourn for lunch because it's 1 o'clock?
I keep the time, sir. Thank you very much. I will let you know when you must go and eat, Honorable Singh.
Deputy Speaker,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to second that motion.
The decision was not placed on the order paper. It's rejected. Go ahead, Honorable Karim.
I take it you haven't extracted any time from me over those superficial interventions, right? Okay.
Go ahead.
So here we
Watch
are.
your clock.
You're saying as opposition parties that it's high on detail, high on vision, low on detail. But one could argue better that than
you are screaming, Honorable
high,
members. Allow the member to speak.
high on detail and low on vision. Because, President, if you had presented a shopping list, as it were, they would have attacked the SONA just as much. They would have said, you see, these are empty promises. It's a shopping list. Where's the capacity to deliver? So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. But that's how most of the opposition parties, regrettably, operate in our parliament. It is endless, rampant opposition for opposition's sake. No recognition here that despite our many differences, we do have a common national interest, and never more than now with our faltering economy, our job challenges, and our increasing inequalities, as a SONA openly and frankly admitted. We need each other, in the interests of mainly the poor and the disadvantaged, but in the interests of all of our people.
Of course, Parliament is always robust in debate, and Yunus Karim is one of the fiercest debaters that we know over the years. But this idea that we need everybody to be bipartisan, to leave their partisanship alone and work for the national interest, how strong is that view in government when it comes to the economy? And more importantly, Deputy Minister, how open are you to suggestions from other parties on how to grow the economy? Because the ANC generally pretends that it knows everything, and it gets very little done on many occasions.
No, the ANC, it's open to different ideas, but those ideas need to be viable, need to be feasible. So we do have our own policies, but we always keep them to test in practice, but also in debate. And I think the attack by, let me rather put it differently, the input by Yunus Karim during the SONA debate, I think he was simply saying, at the core of his debate, his input was, on one hand, saying that the DA promotes free market, and on one hand, the EFF focuses more on almost everything must be done by the state.
And everything must be for free.
And the ANC's position on that, let's take on land. We believe in the mixed economy and mixed ownership of the resources. If you take the debate on land, the ANC, for instance, says we should accept private ownership of land, we should accept state ownership of land, and cooperative ownership of land, collective ownership of land. So in that instance, you will have on one extreme the DA saying that no, all the land must be owned privately, including the land which is owned by the state must be privatized. And the ANC says, look, we've got to have the best way of running this economy is the mixed economy. And I think the debate on the land during this constitutional review will reveal some of those ideological preferences by different parties.
Yeah. So, okay, let's take the ideology out of the economy because it often gets stuck just there. Let's just look at the practicalities. We saw the Auditor General release the State of Municipalities report last week, okay? There's a really interesting article written by Siseko Njobeni in the Business Day, and it says how municipalities are destroying South African businesses. And he's talking about the poultry company Astral Foods, built on a 200 million animal feed mill in Standerton. And he's saying that they are basically unable to get proper water and they are unable to get proper electricity. And as a consequence of that, they are essentially going to almost have to retrench people. People are already working on short time. Chris Schutter, the CEO of Astral, who started the business, says the disconnect between government's so-called pie-in-the-sky talk and reality is flabbergasting. He says government is fixated on concepts like the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and of course unable to provide basic services to existing companies such as Astral and many other established companies and successful businesses. Now, how is a business supposed to function if it doesn't have secure electricity supply and if it doesn't have secure water supply? This situation is a real live situation. This is an actual business that exists that simply can't get past your ineptness in the municipality.
Indeed, Karim, that's a major problem. It's not only in that municipality, Sidibe, Makana, there is a huge problem insofar as supply of water. And I think government has said that in order for us to grow this economy, which has suffered in the last quarter by the decline, 3% negative growth in the in the first quarter. And there is government has said that for us to grow this economy, we've got to focus also on the infrastructure supply, which range from electricity, water, reducing the cost of data.
But if we take that municipality, Standerton, you have a mayor there that is inept, that has been in trouble, and yet you continue keeping him in his position. Why is it that inept municipal managers or mayors are kept in their positions by the governing party when they so clearly cannot provide leadership to how to run a municipality? They are not able to bring business on board. They are the direct result as to why we are losing jobs.
There has to be consequences. We can't tolerate this. I think the electorate has given us a yellow card, and as the African National Congress, we have to act decisively on such inept people who are not doing what they're supposed to do. Are you going to fire them? I think, there has to be consequences. It could be redeployment. It could be, I don't know. I think the leadership will have to take a decision on that because the government has said that there has to be, and AG keeps on saying that there has to be consequences on audit outcomes, on performance. And I'm glad now that the Public Audit Act says that if you incur irregular expenditure, as an official, you've got to take responsibility for that. We may have to recover money from your own pocket, but there has to be consequences on political leadership. And ANC, at different levels at different times, has taken decisions in recalling people and redeploying them in other areas where they can possibly better perform.
Why would you recycle people who clearly cannot run? Why would someone who cannot run a municipality be recycled to govern anywhere else?
No, not necessarily to govern. Redeployment could be that you are put in a place where you are fit for that particular responsibility. So it's not just a question of recycling people in order to keep them in the system. If they've got to be taken out of the system, so be it. The ANC in this period is quite serious about making sure that we perform, all of us in government.
Now, let's come to your specific responsibility in the Treasury. Traditionally and historically, the Deputy Finance Minister is responsible for the PIC. The PIC, as we've seen, is in a complete crisis. There's no board, there's no acting CEO, and of course we've got the hearings. Can you just tell me, Deputy Minister, when exactly will you constitute a new board for the PIC and appoint a new CEO? Are you going to wait until this inquiry is finished? But how are you approaching managing more than a 2 trillion rand fund that is largely made up of government workers' pension funds?
The minister is seized with the task of constituting the interim board. I think the board, full board, is going to be constituted after the commission has done its work, because we've got to take into account what the commission would have said in terms of its own recommendation. PIC at the moment, it is doing its work.
How does it do its work when there's no board and there's no CEO?
Remember, there's still an interim board. The board, which resigned, said that they will cease to exist once an interim board it is in place.
Let me just get this clear, because I mean this is the first time that I hear a government minister actually explain this. So are you saying to me that from Mr. Gungubele, who was your predecessor, to everyone else that was on the board, is actually still the legal board of the PIC as we speak?
Yes, they are. They are. I mean, the deputy chairperson of the deputy chairperson of the former board is now the acting chairperson of the board. So they've said, we are resigning, and the ministry said, look, hang in there until we appoint an interim board. So at the moment, they're operational, and I think very soon the minister will announce an interim board, and the board is going to appoint it after the commission has done its job.
Can you give us specific timelines on when this board is going to be announced? Because obviously this is an entity that is now run by a board that actually resigned, some say on the direct instructions of Minister Tito Mboweni. And of course that happened during the 5th administration. We are now in the 6th administration. When exactly is this board going to be constituted?
I may not give you the exact timelines, but I'm aware that the minister is seriously concerned about the situation at PIC in terms of governance and making sure that we put an interim board as soon as possible. And once the Commission of Inquiry has done its job,
and when is that?
I think it's end of July, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong around the dates, but I think it's end of July. The Commission is expected to have completed its work by end of July.
Now, what happens to the role of the CEO? We've seen Dr. Machila in the hot seat. We've seen him being accused, evidence being led of the fact that he basically ran the PIC as if it was his own piggy bank. What do you think should happen to Mr. Machila, and who should replace him?
I think let's wait for the commission to complete its work, and based on its findings, we'll have to determine what happens to anyone who might have done something wrong with the PIC. And of course, as to who must be appointed as a CEO, that's a function of the board that must interview people on the basis of their performance. In terms of the interview, the board will decide who becomes the CEO.
Deputy Minister, you've been referring to the minister consistently throughout this period, but historically, the PIC has been the business of the Deputy Minister of Finance. Is that about to change?
The minister, even under that conditions in which he will appoint the Deputy Minister as the chair. So
is that still going to happen? You're still going to be appointed the chair of the PIC?
Let's wait for the commission to see what it says insofar as its finding and its assessments of government. It could be that, I'm not sure, that some of the problems that we've encountered, they had to do with the way the operation model.
Yeah, there's a big push to depoliticize the PIC because people feel it's linked to politicians and it can lead to cronyism and so on. What is your position as the Deputy Minister? Would you like to chair the board of the PIC, or do you agree with the idea that the politicians should have nothing to do with that board, so that we make sure that that board makes decisions based on investment outcomes rather than political ones?
Look, I don't know what people mean by depoliticization, because almost everything is political. Politics is about taking decisions on the allocation of resources and allocation of responsibilities, because even in the final analysis, even if you get someone who's not your mainstream politician, there has to be a political decision that is taken on who that person should be, and that decision is taken by the minister. So either way, there will be politics involved insofar as the appointment, the constitution of the board, because in the final analysis, is the minister who must constitute that board. And the question is, in your decisions, what kind of politics? Do you play clean politics or do you play dirty politics? Because you can still have someone appointed either as a deputy minister or someone as an independent who can still play cronyism. I think the critical thing for me is how do we retain and restore the integrity of our institution, retain the integrity of us, the politicians, to serve the people better.
Let me be frank and ask you this as a final question. What is your view? Let's pretend we're sitting in the National Executive Committee or in the Cabinet. If you were to be asked by the Finance Minister, Deputy Minister, do you want to chair the PIC board? Do you, Deputy Minister of Finance?
I think the key thing is that what are the expectations insofar as that role is concerned? And if, for instance, because there is a view that this must be legislated, right, that the Deputy Minister should be the one chairing the board or any other person in the economic cluster. So there will be legislative, in that instance, there will be legislative obligation for me to basically chair the board. And I mean, I've accepted to be the Deputy Minister of Finance, and I'll have to take all the tasks, all the responsibilities.
Including chairing the PIC board.
Including chairing the PIC board.
Now, just as a very final question, I'm being naughty, I'm being told to wrap, but you've worked in the automotive sector, and that is where your history comes from. The automotive sector was built behind very strong industrial policy. And Minister Patel, when he was speaking, he said that that's going to be affecting all of the way in which economic decisions are going to be made. Now, industrial policy are often argued by people who are conservative economists as a form of protectionism. Is South Africa moving in that direction generally with its economy?
No, I think if you look at the automotive sector, the industrial policy in the automotive industry, it was not protectionist. In fact, the industrial policy dismantled protectionism. It said, automotive companies, please export to different countries of the world. Don't be inward looking. And in that regard, the government provided incentives which encouraged the automotive industry to basically export, because the domestic market was so small for the growth of the automotive industry. And the government put the various incentives to encourage the automotive industry to basically export. I mean, BMW today, almost 80% of what they manufacture, it's exported. And the automotive industry, since the MIDP, APDP, has basically exported, its export performance is quite great. And that has had a demonstrating effect for other industry on what is possible, what are the things that we can possibly do in the textile and other industries that really require us to grow them significantly.
So, Abid, what I can take from that is that industrial policy will, of course, be central to the approach to developing economic policy as a whole.
Definitely.
Thank you so very much to the Deputy Minister of Finance. Still ahead, we take a look at the impact that struggling municipalities have on businesses. See you after this.